Hi, everyone. It's Eli Sherman here from WPRI.com. I'm joined today by special guest Sam Salganik of the Rhode Island Parent Information Network, or RIPIN. Today, he's joining me to talk about a survey that they did with parents of children with disabilities and how they did in terms of distance learning this past spring and how they're feeling about the fall. So, Sam, thank you for joining me today. Real quick, why don't you tell me a little bit about what it is that you did with this survey and why?
Sure. So we are a nonprofit that helps a lot of families with kids with disabilities navigate special education. And and we heard a lot from families in the spring about how distance learning was working for them, and we were hearing a lot about what parents were expecting and preferring for the fall. And we thought it was worth it to perform a survey just to see what the pulse of the community was and how distance learning met or didn't meet their needs and what they were hoping to see this upcoming school year.
So you talked to more than 400 parents, and there are roughly 20,000 students with some type of learning disability across the state. Give us a sense, sort of, what was the biggest thing that jumped out to you about the results?
Yeah, thank you. The results really highlighted to me, really underlined the unique challenges that students with disabilities and their families were facing during distance learning. I don't think it was a surprise to us or to anyone who knows maybe they have a kid with disabilities in the house or they have a friend or neighbor. I think everyone knew this was a trying time for those families. But the results really highlighted that for us. So for example, a large majority of parents weren't confident that their child made sufficient academic progress. Parents expressed pretty serious concerns about their child's social and emotional well-being. Another result that really stood out to me, again, not surprising, but underlining what we suspected, was that more than 80% of parents said that their child needed adult support in the home, either all of the time or most of the time, in order to participate in distance learning. And that result was true even among high school students.
Okay, I wonder, just thinking about it, you talk to most parents with students with disabilities, parents with children without disabilities, and they'll say, distance learning was tough. And it was tough for me and my family, and my children required a lot of my support, with or without disabilities. What's different about this for students with disabilities in comparison to students without disabilities?
That's a great question, and we did not perform a survey of all parents, so I can't really speak well to how the results to these exact questions would have differed. But I think one of the things you can do is you can reflect back on how schooling was working before this pandemic. And you would see that students with disabilities, there are students who need occupational therapy, speech therapy. There are students who need alternative PE, physical education. There are students who have one-on-one support from an adult for the whole school day, and they need that during the regular school day. So I think we know that their needs are different than typically developing children.
Okay, I want to talk about this fall a little bit. Obviously, just a couple weeks now before the entire state is supposed to return to some type of learning. The governor has mentioned that they want in-person. She wants in-person learning, but now it seems like districts are setting up some type of in-person learning, some sort of hybrid between in-person and at home learning, and then a third option, which is completely distance learning. What did you hear from parents of students with disabilities in terms of what they would like to see come August 31st?
Mm-hmm. So one thing that we knew already, and again that this survey reinforced, is that students with disabilities have really diverse needs. And we saw that in the question about what they're preferring for the upcoming school year. We saw a large majority that preferred either completely in-person or partially in-person education for their child with disabilities. And I think that's a reflection of the experiences that they had in the spring. But we also saw a smaller group. It was only 16% in our survey that we conducted in July that said they would prefer all distance learning. But when you dig a little deeper um, into that group, more than 3/4 said their child or someone else in the household had a health condition that would prevent them from returning to school in person. So I think what we see again is that these students and these families have really diverse needs, and schools will need to really challenge themselves to think of how to use the resources in place to meet these students' diverse needs.
To that point, Sam, I wonder, and I know you're watching this closely, but all the districts are sort of, their plans are emerging now as to what it is that they're proposing in terms of accomplishing these goals of having school in whatever which manner. Um, is the discussion around meeting the needs of students with disabilities being talked about enough? Is that it being incorporated into those plans well enough from your perspective?
It's a great question. So first I have to say, as you know, there are several dozen plans and they've just been released in draft format. So I haven't carefully reviewed every plan. And I think most of the plans do speak in some way to meeting the needs of students with disabilities. Another thing that I want to say about the plans that's really important is that these are plans, and the rubber's really going to meet the road in the fall and in the winter during the school year when if schools are forced to close because of COVID, are resources actually there, actually in place to provide some in-person support for the students who really need it in a way that can be done safely? If schools are open, are the resources in place to provide a high quality virtual education for students who can't come back to school? So I think there is some thinking and talking and planning already that's happening, but we're really not going to see the results of that planning until the school year starts.
And so you work for an advocacy organization. What is it that you're asking state leaders, lawmakers, the governor, the commissioner to think about in terms of incorporating the needs of students with disabilities?
Yep. So first, we're asking districts to really incorporate these diverse needs into their plans and to think hard and think about lining up the resources that will be necessary to execute on those plans. That's the first thing we're asking, to remember that these students really have diverse needs. The second thing that we're asking is, should schools be forced to return to distance learning, either in whole or in part, that they think through offering some in-person support for students with disabilities who need it, to the extent that it can be done safely. And it could be done potentially in homes, it could be done potentially in school buildings or elsewhere in the community. And we think planning should be happening now to have those resources lined up. And then the third thing we're asking is, if schools are happening in person, that we make sure the resources are in place to provide a high quality virtual education that meets the needs of students who have health conditions that don't allow them to return to school.
And finally, what should parents be doing? If they have concerns, we've heard from plenty of parents at the station who are nervous, for lack of a better word, about what's going to be happening in the fall. If there's a parent out there who has a child with special needs or disabilities, what should they be doing? Who should they be calling? What questions can they be asking?
That's a great question. And our answer to that today is the same as it always has been, which is that a successful, high quality special education experience is built on a foundation of strong communication between families and schools. Trusting communication, respectful communication. So the first place that parents should be going is they should be speaking with their child's classroom teacher, with their special education professionals, with school principals. And then if parents need a little more help and they still feel like their child's needs aren't being met, that's what we're there for. Parents can call us at 401-270-0101. We help thousands of families every year, and we help try to build those trusting relationships between families and schools to make sure the kids' needs are met.
Last one, just what's at stake here, Sam? I mean, you know, if districts aren't going to get this right, if they don't get this right, or the state doesn't get this right, what does that mean to a student with disabilities who, you know, like you said, already has a diverse set of needs, and if they're not met, where does that leave the student and the family?
That's a great question, and I think I look at it from two angles. I think from the angle of the student. Um, these students, many of them are already behind in terms of academic progress, outcomes, you know, graduation rates, things that we consider important markers of success in education. It's already more of a challenge for students with disabilities. And another year of not making progress, it jeopardizes really their futures. And I think from the second angle, we think about the families and the parents, and you know, it is, some of these parents are working, some are nurses, some are teachers, who can't dedicate attention to that child during the day, and it just creates really impossible challenges for those families.
Sam Salganik of the Rhode Island Parent Information Network, thank you very much for joining me for today. If people want to learn much more about this topic, visit WPRI.com.